My name is Tikva, which means hope. I was with my nephew, Ezekiel, when he buried his beloved wife, Eliana. May she rest in peace. Such a young, beautiful bride she was. We were living with the captives of Judah along the river Kibar in Babylon. The city of Jerusalem, back in Judah, had fallen, just as my nephew had prophesied. Although no one wanted to admit he had been right, at least now they were listening a little more closely to his words from Yahweh. We knew Jeremiah had prophesied we would be in Babylon for 70 years before we'd be allowed to return. Israel had been in the land for 490 years, and during that time, according to the Torah, we had been commanded to let the land rest 1 year every 7 years. That meant that no crops were to have been planted that year. Rebellious Israel had never obeyed that command, so Yahweh told us we were to be in Babylon for 70 years to make up for our years of disobedience, and he was going to give the land a rest himself. But Ezekiel, the watchman, was not to rest from giving the people messages from Yahweh. Tikva, hope, is what the people really needed now. We were safe in Babylon, worked hard as a community, and settled into daily life, a life of peace, just like Yahweh had promised. But we were slaves. We needed hope, and we longed for glimpses of the future glory of Israel. Soon after Ezekiel had prophesied about the regathering of the people to the land of Israel with his vision of the dry bones and his message of hope regarding a united kingdom of Israel in future days, Ezekiel heard from Yahweh again. This time, the vision was definitely for the latter years, many days from now. Ezekiel told of a great battle that would take place against the united country of Israel. Israel in those days would be a peaceful people, dwelling without city walls, bars, or gates. But a coalition of countries would come against Israel to plunder and take booty. The leader of this coalition, also known as Gog, would be a mighty ruler of Scythian descent from the land of Magog, or Russia, as you call it today. Some of the elders even discussed whether this prince of Rosh, Meshosh, and Tubal, Moscow, the Volga River, and Turkey, could be a prince of the air. In any case, a military force of the combined modern-day nations of Russia, Turkey, Iran, Germany, Poland, the Czech Republic, Ethiopia, and Libya will ascend like a storm, covering the land like a cloud. Saudi Arabia and England will stand by and watch, but they will not offer aid. There is no mention of the role of the current day United States. I am so thankful Yahweh told us of this battle ahead of time so that our people in the future would have hope and be able to stay calm. Why? Because the entire battle was planned by Yahweh. When he supernaturally intervenes and wins the battle for Israel, Yahweh God will be hallowed by Gog's defeat in front of the eyes of the world. Ah, yes, God's fury will be unleashed upon Gog and his mighty army. First, there will be a mighty earthquake that will shake the entire earth. Then he will bring God's army to judgment with pestilence and bloodshed. There will be flooding rain, great hailstones, like in Joshua's day, God rest his soul, and fire and brimstone, like in Lot's day, God rest his soul. God then promised that the attacking army would fall in the mountains of Israel and become prey for the birds. But Yahweh's display of wonders would not be over yet. He would send fire on the homeland of Gog, on Russia, and on the coastlands. Then, what Yahweh desired most all along, the thing he really wanted to happen, would happen. God's holy name would be known and revered by his own people, Israel, once more. And they would finally know that Yahweh was the Lord, the Holy One of Israel, after fighting that great battle for them. Additionally, the other nations would also know it was Yahweh doing the fighting. Oh, how I hope to see that day. What a day. Ezekiel told us that the people of Israel will be burying the bodies of our enemies for 7 months. And they will have enough fuel from burning the discarded battle weapons to last for 7 years. What happens to their leader, Gog? He will be buried in Israel along with his army, and they will name his burial ground the Valley of Gog's Multitude. I still wondered, why would God cause this horrible battle to happen? Was there no other way? If you haven't noticed, he's been busy in your day trying to attract Israel's attention. Oy vey. As a nation, my people have been a wicked and rebellious house, full of violence and idolatry. But after the battle of Gog from the land of Magog, the house of Israel will know that Yahweh is Lord their God. From that day forward, there will be no going back. From that day on, God will no longer hide his face from his chosen people. And even better, he will send Israel his spirit. After Ezekiel relayed this vision, much time passed, and Yahweh was silent for a time. Occasionally we heard from Jeremiah's family and from Daniel, but there were no new messages or warnings from Yahweh. Then, 14 years after the fall of Jerusalem, the hand of the Lord came upon Ezekiel once again for one final, magnificent prophetic vision. He wanted Ezekiel to know that he would once again rebuild the desire of Israel's eyes. Just as Ezekiel would see his beloved Eliana again, the desire of his eyes, God rest her soul, so too would Israel behold their temple in the last days. He took Ezekiel back into the visions of God, back to Jerusalem once more. First he took him and set him on the top of a very high mountain where he could see a great city. The man who escorted him throughout the vision had the appearance of bronze. He had a line of flax and a measuring rod in his hand. He told him to pay attention closely so that he could tell the house of Israel everything he had seen. So Ezekiel watched carefully as the man-angel transported him to see an amazing structure, the future temple of Yahweh. His guide showed him the outside wall and the eastern and southern entrance gates. As he walked around the different parts of the temple, such as the outer courts, the chambers for the singers and priests, the sanctuary, and the entire temple area, Ezekiel's bronze guide measured each part precisely so Ezekiel could carefully record the dimensions. When they were finished, the guide brought Ezekiel to the eastern gate. He looked up, and behold, the glory of the God of Israel was coming from the way of the east. His voice was like the sound of many waters, and the earth shone from his glory. Ezekiel described the glory he saw as being identical to the vision he saw by the river Kibar. He was so overwhelmed by it, he fell on his face. The Spirit of the Lord lifted him up and brought him into the inner court of the temple. Do you know what? He then saw the glory of the Lord fill the temple again. Just as he had seen it depart from the first temple, he witnessed the glory fill this new one. Then a voice from the glory cloud spoke to Ezekiel while a man stood next to him. What he said was amazing. Ezekiel was careful to record all that was said. This would be the place of the throne of Yahweh. This would be the very place where the Lord would dwell in the midst of Israel forever. No more would the children of Israel defy his holy name in his glorious temple. Ezekiel was instructed to describe God's house to the house of Israel and keep record of the pattern and the measurements. When they finally became ashamed of all they had done as a people, they were to be made aware of Ezekiel's blueprint of the temple so they could keep its whole design and construct it when the time came. But that was not all. Oh, you must read his writings. There would be many new ordinances and laws regarding the new temple. For example, the eastern gate would be shut. No man could enter by it because God had entered it. The prince may sit in it to eat bread, but no one else. And they needed to pay close attention to who they would allow into the temple. No more foreigners or those uncircumcised in flesh and heart. They had defiled the previous house of the Lord. Now only the priests of the line of Zadok, not even all the descendants of Aaron, could minister to God in the sanctuary to offer the fat and the blood. The priests were to wear linen garments, no wool, and they were not allowed to shave their heads nor let their hair grow long. They had to keep their hair well trimmed. They were to be the teachers of Israel, to teach the people the difference between the holy and unholy, the clean and unclean. Further, the priests would operate as the judges of Israel in controversies and make sure that the Sabbaths were hallowed. Did you know that in the future there will be a holy district in Israel? It will be roughly 7.1 by 5.68 miles wide. In the holy district, there will be a square plot for the sanctuary, the most holy place. This holy section of land will belong to the priests who come near to minister to the Lord, and they will live there in their houses. There will also be an area designated for the Levites. Next to the holy district, there will be a strip of land that will be common land owned by all Israel. The prince of Israel will have a section on one side of that. The prince will not be allowed to own or purchase any property outside his allotted section. Who will be this prince of Israel? How will he be chosen? I wish I knew. However, God was careful to set laws defining the behaviors and roles of the future princes. For example, there could be no violence or plundering. The prince must rule with justice and honest scales. Yahweh even defines and changes the measuring system for us. The prince was to provide livestock for offerings given at the feast days, the Passover, Feast of Tabernacles, Year of Jubilee, the Sabbaths and new moons, and even the daily sacrifices. So much would be similar, yet different. Then the angel man brought Ezekiel back to the door of the temple. He looked, and there was water flowing from under the threshold of the temple, pouring out toward the east. Remember, the front side of the temple always faced east. Under the right side of the temple, south of the altar, it was like a spring bubbling up from the fountain of God. Ezekiel held us all spellbound as he described what happened as he and his angel guide followed the stream. The water flowed downhill eastward, and as it flowed, it became deeper and deeper. By the time they were 6,000 feet from the source, it was a huge river, large enough to swim across. The new healing river flowed all the way down to the Jordan Valley and entered the Dead Sea. And do you know what happened next? The entire Dead Sea was healed and came to life. Fish could live there. Moreover, every place the river flowed came alive too. It brought life. Ezekiel saw fishermen lining the banks of the river, spreading their nets. Along the banks of the river, all kinds of fruit trees grew. Yahweh said their leaves would never wither and their fruit would never fail. They would bear fruit every month of the year because their water flowed from the sanctuary. And the leaves, they would be used for medicines. Oh, how I just longed to see God's river of life. God gave Ezekiel further instructions regarding the allotment of the land, similar to the ones he gave Joshua the first time they entered the promised land, but different too. After defining the borders of the land of Israel, he instructed them to divide the land according to the tribes of Israel by lot. The tribe of Joseph would receive 2 portions, of course, and this time any stranger dwelling among the tribe could also have a portion of inheritance. So the land was divided up by the Lord God with a section for each tribe. The map of the portions looked like a stack of rectangles, one for each tribe from north to south. You might want to take a look at this map. Dan's portion was on the northern border, and Gad's was along the southern border, with the other tribes and the holy district in between. Of course, the holy city would be in their midst. The gates of the city would be named for the 12 tribes of Israel. And the name of the city, the new name, it will be The Lord is There. Oh, how I long to dwell in the presence of Yahweh again. From our vantage point right now on the Kibar River in the foreign land of Babylon, things weren't going our way. But our hope, our tikvah, was that one day our nation would be revived and come to life again. Once again, God would dwell in our midst, and we would be his people, and he would be our God. Ezekiel and I never made it back to Jerusalem or to Judah when the exiles returned to rebuild the temple. God took us home to Eliana, before the 70 years were up. But Joshua and Zerubbabel, along with many others, did eventually return. God's plans for us truly were for our good and not for evil, to give us a future and a hope.